Rebelling from victim mentality and self-pity. Murmur at nothing. If our ills are repairable, it is ungrateful. If remediless, it is vain. Shakespeare. Every man supposes himself not to be fully understood or appreciated. Ralph Waldo Emerson. What poison is to food, self-pity is to life. Oliver C. Wilson. Self-pity is a death that has no resurrection, a sinkhole from which no rescuing hand can drag you because you have chosen to sink. Elizabeth Elliot. A man's as miserable as he thinks he is. Marcus Annius Seneca, who lived approximately 54 BC to 39 AD, Roman rhetorician and writer. Do not weep, do not wax indignant. Understand. Baruch Spinoza said that. To understand the world, one must not be worrying about oneself. Einstein said that. Sometimes I go about in pity for myself, and all the while a great wind is bearing me across the sky. And that's a Ojibwa Native American saying. I might be mispronouncing that. Self-pity is one of the cheapest, most addictive, and most debilitating drugs available in the neuropharmacopoeia of negative emotions. You don't even have to walk down to the corner store. You can start freebasing self-pity while still under the covers. Self-pity is like a self-replenishing box of glazed donuts, conveniently placed by your side. When you drive, it's on the seat next to you. When you go to bed, it jumps into bed with you. Without even realizing it, you find your hand reaching under the cardboard and cellophane lid of your donut box, and before you know it, there is a heavy mass of glazed donut paste decomposing in your stomach. The essential problem with glazed donuts is that we eat them to feel better, but they make us feel worse. Self-pity is one of the most deadly comforts, the thing we reach for when we feel bad that seduces us into feeling much worse. We become vulnerable to self-pity when our pride is wounded, when our inner child is upset, and when we focus on our neediness rather than compassion for others. If we focus on serving the world, we find ourselves in a golden age of opportunities. If we focus on how the world serves us, however, we see the world as mother's breast and find ourselves in an age of sorrows, frustrations, and irritations as we discover a vast diabolical conspiracy to keep us from suckling. Self-pity is like an obese man eating pizza in front of the TV, being irritated by the irrelevant sight of a starving child in Ethiopia, while the world ignores the staggering injustice that slender young hotties don't love him for who he really is. So this is one of the things about self-pity that I've noticed is it makes people cruel because they're so focused on their sense of grievance that they have no compassion for others. A tear dries quickly when it is shed for troubles of others. Cicero said that, the Roman orator and politician who lived from 106 to 443 BC. Two essential attributes self-pity depends on are internal considering and upward comparison. When in self-pity mode, we focus on internal consideration, what we are feeling and how we are put upon, victimized, and unfairly treated by life. While we focus on internal considering, we tend to be blind, deaf, dumb, and indifferent to what others are feeling. Never allow your own sorrow to absorb you, but seek out another to console, and you will find consolation. J.C. Macaulay said that. Self-pity is prone to upward comparison. It would like us to compare ourselves to others who seem better off. Self-pity is violently allergic to downward comparison, to the comparison of our situation to that of others who are worse off. The image of the starving child in Ethiopia is a pity party pooper, as unwelcome as the parental knock on the door in the midst of masturbation. So if you find yourself in self-pity mode and want to intervene, External considering and downward comparison will be like a bucket of water on the head of the wicked witch of the West. On the other hand, we should not have contempt for ourselves or others who are afflicted with self pity. Also, it is sometimes hard to discern where authentic suffering leaves off and self pity begins. It is crucial to have compassion for yourself when you must endure galling hardships and mistreatment from others. There are many gray cases where self compassion for authentic suffering starts to phase into self pitying. In other cases, self pity is present, but there are also elements of self compassion and authentic suffering as well. I have found two elements that aid in discerning self compassion from self pity. When in self pity mode, we want others to come to the rescue, show that they feel our pain, and make us feel better. We are in a state where we feel dependent on outside rescue. The other sign that we are not in self compassion and have descended into debilitating self pity is when we become passive, lethargic, and unwilling to take available positive steps that could improve the situation. If you have genuine compassion for someone suffering, you'll be willing to take positive steps to help. If you have genuine compassion for yourself, you'll be willing to take positive steps for yourself and won't wait for outside help when there are things you can do for yourself. For example, the key thing I think is to realize that self-compassion is a loving feeling for oneself. If I'm thinking like, oh, Betsy was so mean to me, but when I commit suicide, she's going to feel so bad, and then she'll realize who really loved her. This kind of thing, that's clearly self-pity, because you're trying to, in your fantasy, you're trying to create an emotion in someone else. That's a sure sign you're in self-pity mode rather than self-compassion. If you have genuine compassion for someone suffering, I guess I read that. If you have genuine compassion for yourself, you'll be willing to take positive steps for yourself and won't wait for outside help when there are things you can do for yourself. For example, my morale always improves if my home is reasonably clean and orderly. So if I'm feeling bad, unless there's some overwhelming trauma or grief, I'm still able to clean up my home. I'm able to better my situation in some way. That's self-compassion. I am in self-compassion mode if I'm willing to take at least that simple step to help myself. If I'm not willing to take this positive step, then I am probably in self-pity mode and don't want anything that will interfere with bringing on negative emotions. So if I feel genuine compassion for somebody, I'm not just going to go up to them and be like, oh, I'm so sorry for what you feel. That must feel absolutely awful. Um, to me, love is a verb. So if there's real compassion, I'm going to be like, well, let's think about this. What caused this problem? How can we solve it? So my emphasis, of course, I'm a thinking type, is not on consolation for myself or others, but on clarification on what caused the suffering, what can we do about it, and let's take action. So here's my intervention plan for self-pity. Shift from internal considering to external considering. Shift from upward comparison to downward comparison, thinking about all the people who are worse off than you, and list all the things you have to be grateful for. For example, consider what a hardship it would be to have a missing hand or two. Just use my two working hands, which not everybody has. Excuse me. If you have working five-fingered hands, that is a blessing. Take positive actions to help your life. Do not wait for outside rescue. If you care about yourself and your suffering, get up and take positive action. Clean your house. Pay down your credit card by $2 if that's all you can spare. Do a neglected task. And do any small services for yourself that you would do for another person you cared about who was suffering. Many others have recognized positive action as the antidote for self-pity. The secret of being miserable is to have leisure to bother about whether you are happy or not. The cure for it is occupation. George Bernard Shaw said that. The cure for grief is motion. Elbert Hubbard said that. When you find yourself overpowered, as it were, by melancholy, the best way is to go out and do something. John Keble. I got the blues thinking about the future, so I left off and made some marmalade. It's amazing how it cheers one up to shred oranges or scrub the floor. D.H. Lawrence. I think you get the message about action as an antidote. I've got a few more suggestions before I close by recommending a brand of magic that can transform self-pity. The opposite of self-pity mode is warrior mode. I strongly recommend reading some of the documents in the Warrior Stance section of this site. You could start with The Way of the Warrior. To learn more about how afflictive thoughts and feelings work psychologically and neurologically, and for some practical techniques to deal with them, see A Guide to the Perplexed Interdimensional Traveler. These are all, check the text of the card, these are all linked up. And a lot of them are YouTubes. Many useful ideas and techniques can be found in Awakening from Depression, another document. Finally, self-pity depends on negative interpretations. Another antidote is to practice what I call interpretive magic. For those who have time to read or watch more, I'm going to include video on interpretive magic. So let me give you an example of self-pity versus the correct form of action. So I knew this was kind of coming when last spring I finally, after 45 years of trying to create this book, Parallel Journeys, my fantasy epic. You can read it free on the website or get it on Amazon as an Audible, Kindle, or physical book. And I kind of knew this was coming, but when I finished the book and released it, it's kind of like you getting to the end of a 45-year finish line, and there's like a guy across the street walking his dog, looking at his phone. Like, it hasn't sold very many copies, and I kind of knew this insult to my pride was coming, and I had to work through that and make sure I didn't feel embittered or that didn't make me feel a paralyzing sadness or something like that. And what I discovered was I didn't lose a single creative session because of that. I worked through it. I clarified that I knew all along that was a possibility, that I am creating my work not for the many, but for the few that can really understand it. I remembered the William Blake quote, at least I think it's been attributed to him. Fortune is a whore ready to kiss anyone's ass. I labor upward into futurity. Because if I was really great at chucking a football or managing a stock portfolio, I could get a lot more attention and fame and money for those things. My whole creative career, if I want to get into self-pity, has operated at a six-figure loss. And it would be, it helps our sense of identity and pride if we get paid for our work. However, the response I found was keep doing the work and not checking for progress, not looking for attention, not looking for accolades, but just to continue to take action. And so I had to work through a little bit of that emotional funk, but it didn't cost me a single creative session. I just kept working, and the work itself is its own reward. And some people do find it. But if you want to donate to the site and come to my rescue, like the self-pitying person thinks, you can donate to the website. Overcome self-pity. It is a burden that only becomes heavier the more we carry it.